Hello and welcome to the Rotary eClub of Silicon Valley. My name is Mitty Chang. I'm the president of this Rotary Club. Every week we bring to you a new program about education, innovation, technology, and humanitarian service. I'm very excited that this week we actually have one of our own members presenting. But before we introduce him, I'd like to introduce one of our other members on the call. That's Chris Cochran. Chris, can give everyone a wave. Chris is one of our resident Canadians with our club. He is also in the film industry, and he does a lot of production work nationally and internationally. You can check out some of his work, and we're really glad to have him. He's also serving on our board of directors. Next to Chris, we have Keith Marsh, who is one of our members and also going to be our presenter this week. Keith has been a Rotarian for over 30 years and is currently a charter member with our club, the Rotary eClub of Silicon Valley. He's attended Rotary meetings on 5 continents and has worked on international service projects in 5 countries, including a recent trip to Cuba with H2 Open Doors. Very cool. Several of his photos have been published in the Rotarian Magazine over the past 20 years, and he's actually the winner of the 2016 photo contest. So we've actually gotten quite a few emails asking to be connected with Keith, so super exciting about that. His interest in photography started when he was a young boy growing up in northern Idaho. He's been active in the local and regional photography organizations for the past 20 years and has participated in over 200 photographic competitions. He served as the president of the Marin Photography Club and was a founding member of the Marin Digital Group. His current interest is in Astro Photographic nightscapes, and I'm sure he'll tell us a little bit more about that. He's a certified real estate appraiser and has been appraising custom homes in Marin County for over 30 years. So that's right here in the Silicon Valley, San Francisco area. He lives in San Anselmo with his wife, Helena, who is also a Rotarian. Keith, welcome, and please take it away from here.
Thank you, Mitty, and congratulations on having a fantastic year. Can you hear me all right?
Yep, we can hear you all right.
Okay, let me go ahead and start my screen share here. So the topic of my presentation is astrophotography and the Milky Way. A little bit about my photographic background. I'm not a professional photographer. I consider myself an advanced amateur. But this is basically just a hobby for me. I do sell some images on a website that you'll see later, but mostly it's just for fun. And most of what I learned, as you mentioned before, is through the Marin Photography Club, which I was a president of several years ago. And you just learn a lot from working with other photographers in the area. We've got a lot of very talented people here and good judges and workshops and so forth. So most of what I learned was through that organization. Why did I pick astrophotography? Well, to be honest, about 5 or 6 years ago, I was a little bored with photography. I found that I was just shooting everything that other photographers were shooting, and I said I wanted to do something a little different, but I couldn't quite find the right kind of photography that kind of suited me. So one day I was researching a trip to the Four Corners area of the United States, and specifically to the the Natural Bridges National Monument there in southern Utah. And I happened to see a fantastic photo of a Milky Way shot over one of the natural bridges. So fortunately, the guy who took the photograph, his name was in the article, and even I think a direction to his website. So I checked it out, and he talked about being able to capture 50,000 times the amount of light to be able to capture the Milky Way. And so I was just fascinated with that. And I contacted him, and he was at first a little reluctant to give me any information because he thought I might be competing with him commercially. And after I convinced him I wasn't going to do that, he gave me the basic camera settings that he uses. And from there, I kind of took off, and since then, I've kind of developed my own technique that's a little different than anybody else, but that's kind of how I got into it. The equipment that I use, you can see in the picture on the right there, that was from an article that was published in the Rotarian Magazine a couple of years ago when they published my first photograph. I'd entered a photograph to the contest, but it didn't win, but they liked it so much that they published it anyway. And at the same time, they asked me to put a little article in about me. And so I had a friend who's a professional photographer take this photograph of me with one of my images. So basically, it consists of a very, very sturdy tripod. And I use a Nikon D700, which is not the latest technology, but it's a pretty good camera, a full frame sensor. And then I've got a very, very good lens that I use. It's a Nikon f2.8 14 to 24 lens. Very, very good lens for what I do. So my photographs, as you've already mentioned, have been published in the Rotarian Magazine and also National Geographic. I'll talk about some of those later. If you want to see more of my photography, you can go to my website, which is listed there. And on that website, there's links to several photographic sources, including one that includes photographs of my Rotary service projects around the world. But there's another website there called Fine Art America where you can purchase my images. You can have them framed. You can have them put on T-shirts. You can, cell phones, whatever. It's a pretty cool website if you want to buy artwork. So before I talk more about my artwork or the photography part of it, I wanted to talk about what I'm photographing, and that's of course the Milky Way and the universe beyond it. And I want to talk about how vast this universe is and how big the space is out there relative to what our little solar system. So in looking at how big we are, the first thing we talk about is the speed of light, which is 186,000 miles per second. And according to Einstein's theory of special relativity, nothing can travel faster than the speed of light. And so that's the fastest thing that we know, and that's how we measure distances in the universe. So the distance to the moon is 1.3 light seconds. It only takes a little over a second for the light to go bounce off the moon from the sun and come to the Earth. So it's the closest thing to us. The sun, of course, is 93 million miles away, so it takes a little longer, eight light minutes for the light to get from the sun to the Earth. If we look at our solar system, if you look at the distance across the solar system as defined by the outer orbit of, say, Pluto, it takes light about 10 light hours to cross our solar system. So that's a pretty big solar system relative to our distance from the moon and to the sun. And then looking at space relative to human-based or human-created travel, if you look at the Voyager 1, which you see down there on the lower right, that was a satellite that was sent up in 1977, and it took 35 years for it to exit our solar system and enter interstellar space. So that's 35 years at a speed of 38,000 miles per hour, which sounds pretty fast, but relative to the speed of light, it's not even that close. So the fastest thing that we've ever been able to create, our scientists were able to come up with the Juno probe, and to get it up to orbit Jupiter, they did a gravitational sling around the Earth that got it up to 165,000 miles per hour, but still just a fraction of the speed of light. So now if we look a little further out, the closest star to us is Proxima Centauri at 4 light years. And you may have heard that they think they found a planet that circles Proxima Centauri. They haven't seen it because it's too far away, but because of the gravitational pull, they think it's there, and it might be similar to Earth. And they've talked about maybe sending a probe to take pictures and send it back. But to do that, since it's 4 light years away, they would need to create a probe or a satellite that could travel at 1/5 the speed of light and would weigh approximately 1 gram. Now, to get an idea of what that would look like, a raisin weighs about 1 gram. So we need to have something about the size of a raisin that can travel 1/5 the speed of light, have the capability to take photographs and then send them back at the speed of light to Earth. So it would take 20 years at 1/5 the speed of light to get to this star, this planet, and then another 4 years to get the pictures back. So we're talking 24 years according to what they're currently hoping to be able to do. And that technology isn't even here yet. So the brightest star in the sky is Sirius at 8.6 light years. The nearest galaxy to us outside of the Milky Way is Andromeda at 2.5 million light years. And the furthest galaxy that they've ever been able to detect is one at 13.2 billion light years, which if you think about the age of the universe at 14 billion years, that kind of gives you some perspective. There are, according to my research about 2 months ago, there are 200 billion galaxies in the universe, but that number has now been updated to about 2 trillion galaxies. So that's how fast the technology is changing. And Hubble telescope has been able to detect more galaxies in the universe. That's in just the observable universe. The number of stars is estimated at 10 sextillion. For those who have never heard of that before, that's basically 10 billion trillion. So that's a big number, a lot of stars out there. So in our Milky Way galaxy, the diameter of our galaxy is about 120,000 light years. So that's not too shabby. The galactic center of the Milky Way is approximately 25,000 light years from Earth. So as you see in the photographs, the light that you're seeing is 25,000 years away. In our galaxy, there's estimated to be 200 billion stars and 100 billion planets, just in our one little galaxy. And remember, they're talking about 2 trillion galaxies in the universe so far. You'll also notice in some of the photographs, there's kind of a darkish cloud that goes through the Milky Way. That's called the Great Rift. And it's just something I learned about recently, and it's apparently caused by the formation of new stars in the Milky Way. And this formation actually creates a situation where the light from behind the stars behind it and within the Milky Way can't get through, and so it blocks the light through that region. So some of the challenges of the photography that I do, it's not really very easy. I've got to travel to remote locations, and I like to take photographs around kind of iconic images, foreground images, and then to be able to shoot them with the Milky Way in the photograph, you have to be shooting to the south, which is where the center of the Milky Way galaxy is. So I've got to do a lot of planning and strategy as far as trying to figure out where I'm going to shoot from, what time, and so forth. So and a lot of travel involved sometimes. Weather and temperature are always factors. You can't, of course, shoot a Milky Way image when it's cloudy, rainy. You know, at night when I'm shooting, it sometimes can get very cold, especially at very high altitudes. So I typically limit my photographic work to the summer months for that reason. Moonlight is also a problem. I try to work around a new moon, so there's not a whole lot of moonlight that can wash out the stars. So I've got about 5 days either side of a new moon that I can work with to be able to get the maximum darkness in the sky. Light pollution is a real problem, and I'll show you more about that in a few minutes. And then post-production, when I get back, I've got to do a lot of work on the images to get them maximized the way I want. And recently one person asked me if all this work in Photoshop doesn't kind of negate its validity as a photograph. And the answer is no, it doesn't, because in all competitions for photography and presentations of photography, you're always allowed to do adjust the exposure. Even Ansel Adams did a lot of work working on exposure. And that's all I'm doing, basically. But I'm working with a very wide range of exposures, and to be able to maximize the image, it takes a lot of work. And so that's why I spend so much time in Photoshop, but it it doesn't change anything in the photograph. It doesn't add anything or take away anything that would negate it being an authentic image. So here's a photograph showing the progress of light pollution around the United States from the late 1950s until projected to be at 2025. And you can see that at night, a lot of the areas of the east are just completely blocked out. You can't see any Milky Way images because of all the light pollution from cities and so forth. The West Coast is a little bit better. California is not too bad. In the upper Central Valley, up around Mount Lassen, Mount Shasta, and in the central part of the United States, around the Four Corners, it's still pretty good. So I want to show you how I do my images, which is a little different than most people that are doing this. So this is an image of this night sky that I took this one around midnight over Crater Lake. This exposure requires about 15,000 times the exposure of a regular daytime shot. So in order to capture that, I've got to do two things. I've got to increase the time of the exposure, and I use about 25 seconds, which is very, very long for a photograph. And then I increase the ISO, the sensitivity of the sensor to capture more light. And the problem with that is that it increases the noise in the image. So I've got to work in then eliminating noise in the photograph. But to be able to capture the night sky at this exposure, that's how I do it. Now then, you'll notice the foreground is all dark. And that's the problem with this, is that to be able to get a good exposure on both the sky and the foreground is impossible in one image, pretty much. So there's several ways you can illuminate the foreground to make a more interesting image. So one would be using moonlight. Moonlight is actually pretty strong. Even a small crescent will put out a lot of light. And you'll see a photograph later of a picture taken with a supermoon that looks almost like daytime. So moonlight's a very, very good source of light, but it washes out the sky. So I don't want to use moonlight for my exposure. Some people use flash or light painting. They use big flashlights or even car lights to expose the foreground. The problem with that is that it's got a limited distance to it. A flash will only carry a very short distance. It would illuminate, this tree, for example, but it would not illuminate Wizard Island and Crater Lake or the mountains on the background. Another way is to use a very, very long exposure to capture the more light in the foreground, and then combine that with the night sky that you've got there above. So you'd have two images you'd combine with that. And then the last way is this is what I do, is I use natural light, and I set up well in advance. I'll go research my location and know exactly what I want to do for the image, and then take a not a daytime shot, but a late evening shot where there's still light in the sky, and capture the foreground. So here's an image that I took. This is after sunset, but there's enough light in the sky to be able to expose the tree and the lake and the island at Crater Lake and the mountains behind. And you couldn't do that with any other light source. So I've got a lot of detail there, but I want to make it look like it's at night. So I combine the two images, and then I kind of work in Photoshop to make the adjustments to exposure so that it looks realistic relative to the fact that we're talking huge differences between the exposure on the foreground and the sky. So that's how my images are created. It's very risky because you never know. You got to have your cameras set up very sturdy on a tripod. Nothing can change for 4 or 5 hours while you're waiting from one shot to the next. So a lot can go wrong, and you're there all night for just basically one image. So this image is by far my most successful so far. It was not only the winner of the Rotarian Magazine contest, but it was also featured and selected by National Geographic as the photo of the day a year ago, June, and received a lot of favorable hits on that. That was a real coup. And then here's some other images that I've taken over the years. These are kind of special. These are taken in the Bristlecone Pine forests in the White Mountains east of Bishop. This is up around 11,000 feet. I took these in August. It wasn't too cold that night. But what's kind of special about these is that these trees are the oldest living organisms on Earth. They date back up to 5,000 years. You think about the fact that when the oldest trees there were just seedlings 5,000 years ago, or 3,000 BC, the light that you're seeing from the Milky Way in the background had already been traveling for 20,000 years at that point, and is just now getting to us 5,000 years later. 25,000 years is what it takes for that light to get to us. So that kind of puts things into perspective. The photograph on the lower right is an image that was also selected by National Geographic as part of their daily dozen. Every day they publish 12 images from photographers. Excuse me. And I mean, they receive tens of thousands of images every day, and they pick 12 and they post them, and then people can vote on which ones they like the best. And I was fortunate to get the most votes on that image on that particular day. This was the first image that was published in the Rotarian Magazine a couple years ago. One of the first ones I did where I used a composite image with the foreground. It's at Mount Lassen in Northern California. This was probably the most strenuous shoot that I had in Yosemite, trying to shoot the Milky Way over Half Dome. And in order to get to this location, it's on the north side of the canyon. The only way to get there is either to climb up the cliff at Snow Creek, which is very, very strenuous, or come in from Highway 20, which is on the way to Tuolumne Meadows. And that's about a 4-mile hike in from the highway down to this location where you can see Half Dome. So 4 miles in, shoot for 3 or 4 hours and then hike back out. And then back to another hour back to the valley. So very, very strenuous, very high altitude, 8,000 feet or so. Oh, by the way, the light there on the horizon is light pollution, probably from Bakersfield. So that's how much light pollution you have coming into Yosemite Valley. Some other images, natural bridges in Utah, and also Arches National Park. Mount Shasta, I took this just recently in May. I'd been up there a couple times trying to get the right spot to shoot from because I want to shoot to the south. And in this particular, what's interesting about this is that the top of the peak is illuminated with what we call alpenglow. It's kind of an orangish glow of light, which looks like it's coming from the Milky Way, but it's actually from a sunset. On the horizon, just after the sunset, the sky turned bright orange, and that orange sunset reflected onto the peak of Mount Shasta to give it that kind of orangish glow. The other photo is from Caples Lake, south of Lake Tahoe. It's a small reservoir, and I was able to get the stars reflected in the lake with a sailboat there. 2 photos from Cuba recently. The larger one at the top is from my trip with the Rotary trip with H2 Open Doors in April. And both of these are taken from the southern coast of Cuba, of course, in order to be able to see the Milky Way from from the shore. You got to be shooting south, and of course away from the lights of Havana and all the other big cities. So that's how I took these. This one was one I took kind of accidentally while we were up shooting at Crater Lake. This kid climbed up in the tree and had a flashlight and wanted to do this image. So I just clicked off while he was up there. My camera was still on the tripod. I hadn't moved for a couple hours, so it was pretty easy to do. Here's some of the problems you have with the Milky Way. You've got clouds, you've got light pollution from a neighboring town, you've got phone lines or power lines through the image, so things can go wrong. You're out there, for several hours, and this is the best you can do. When I'm not shooting in the Milky Way, I'm sometimes shooting star trails, and here's two examples. One is in Yosemite. These pictures are taken over an hour and a half, 2 hours, by taking one picture after another of 30 seconds each. And then in a program, I stack them so that each star trail is added to the next one. And as each little elongated star adds up, you get the star trails. Now, the one on the right is one that I took in Idaho, and that was during a supermoon. So you can see how much moonlight is added to that picture. It almost looks like it's during the daytime, but it washes out a lot of the stars. So I wanted to share with you my latest National Geographic Milky Way image that I took up in Glacier National Park here recently. I spent 4 days with a couple buddies of mine, and we spent several months planning the trip, making sure we knew exactly where we wanted to shoot, and we traveled up there. Spent a lot of time and effort getting there. And so this is the best picture that I was able to get from that shoot. So this is my buddy Doug, and the reason we didn't get a better shot than this is because it was cloudy the whole time, and we didn't get a chance to see one single star the whole trip. So we had to shoot other images during that time. So we've known each other for 50 years. We both grew up in Idaho together, and matter of fact, this is both of us in the 4th grade over about 50 years ago. So we're still buddies. Matter of fact, he'll be here in a couple of weeks to visit. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions, and I'll stop the screen share here if I can. Oops, I gotta get out of this first.
That was
okay.
The photos are breathtaking, and I know that you mentioned that you don't consider yourself a master photographer, but I would definitely disagree. In fact, you are definitely, in my opinion, a master photographer. And that photo with Doug was perfect. It's a good example of my photography skills. That's about as much of a Milky Way I'd be able to get. So I'm going to start off the questions. I'm not sure if Chris has any, but I wanted to get a better understanding of, for me, any of the viewers out there who are trying to become an amateur photographer, and maybe they have their own DSLR set, or they're thinking about getting one this coming season. What recommendations do you have for them? What would you tell yourself if you could go back in time and tell the younger version of you when you were just starting off with photography? What are some tips that you would give?
Well, that's a good one. You learn stuff all along, and I guess the main thing is just to experiment. I see other photographers, and I'm always amazed at what they're doing, and I don't necessarily want to copy them, but I want to get ideas from them. For example, the program you had last week on ghosting was very, very interesting. I've never tried something like that. I've seen other photographers do similar things, and so I'm thinking how I could maybe incorporate something like that into some of my photos. So, and I've got a whole list of stuff that I've written down over the years on ideas kind of a cheat sheet that I've created, and it takes time to put this together. But the best thing I would recommend is to join a photo club like I did, meet other photographers, see what they're doing, learn from them, and then kind of develop your own technique. But it's something that just doesn't come overnight. I've been photographing most of my life and didn't start this type of photography until I was, over 60. So it sometimes takes a while. But like I say, the main thing is just to try it, try different things, and just kind of study photography and go from there.
That's some good advice. Thanks, Keith. Chris, I see you're not muted anymore, so I'm going to turn it for you for a question or comment.
Yeah, I don't know if you can see me or not, Keith, but for some reason I've lost video going to you. I don't know why, or maybe coming back to me.
I can see you.
Yeah, okay. I can't. In any event, my question is, what's your next challenge? You've done this. There must be something you want to do next. What is it?
Well, that's a good one. I haven't really thought about that. I've always liked photojournalism, and that's something that I've also kind of thought about pursuing more. not as a profession, but just as, trying to find something that I can document over maybe a longer period of time than just going, down and shooting something that, a fire that occurred, like the one in Oakland the other day, but something more of an ongoing kind of project. But I'm still working on ideas for my astrophotography, of looking at it and doing it different ways. Because what I do is very, very challenging, and it takes a lot of patience and a lot of time just to create one image. I'm lucky to get 2 or 3 images a year. Yeah. So if I can find some other way to expand that, and then travel around and the different parts of the world and record the Milky Way from different continents would be kind of fun too. So I'm always just looking at new things to.
Yeah, I think you'll find with photojournalism, you'll have to carry 3 cameras at once. One with a wide angle lens, one with a telephoto, and one with the standard 55. Because you haven't got time to start changing around. You guys got to and go. Right?
Well, I usually carry 5 or 6 cameras with me when I travel. Everything from an iPad to a GoPro to two DSLRs to a little point and shoot. So I agree with you that for photojournalism, you got to carry a lot of equipment. Yeah, I hear what you're saying.
You ever thought of trying to apply what you're doing to video?
I haven't. Now, a friend of mine has been doing time lapses of the Milky Way, and that's been very interesting. But of course, it takes a lot of memory to be able to capture, 2 or 3 hours of the Milky Way moving, and with huge files. So I've been kind of reluctant because I'm kind of cheap on memory. They are fantastic images to watch, and a lot of photographers have done them very well. Yeah.
Well, keep up the great work. I just love your images.
Thank you.
If everyone were continuing like you, we have an unbelievable set of photographs.
Thank you.
Keith, do you work exclusively with Adobe Photoshop when you're making these composite images, or do you use one of the other programs as well?
No, it's pretty much Adobe Photoshop. I do use some other plugins for other photography. I use the Nick collection, which is now I think owned by Google, for black and white and for color. But almost everything that I use on my my astrophotography images, and a lot of it's in masking and adjustments to the exposure. It's pretty much all in Photoshop. I don't use Lightroom. A lot of photographers do, but I've learned through Photoshop, and so I just stick with that. So that seems to work for me.
Kevin, you were talking earlier in your presentation about upping the ISO. How much are we talking about? What are we going to? 400, 4,000? What are we looking at?
I shoot at 3,200.
Okay.
That's kind of the maximum for me that I like. I mean, you can go higher, but you're going to be starting to creating more noise. Yeah. And I do set my my camera has a noise reduction for both high ISO and long exposure. So Nikon is pretty good about noise reduction, and so I can set those settings high. And then I'll also in Photoshop, when I'm processing the raw images, I can also do some noise reduction there. So my images are pretty free of noise, which is very fortunate.
Yeah, you're doing 3,200 ISO, they're extremely free of noise.
Yeah. And I try to keep my time to about 25 seconds because of the movement of the stars. You start to get some star trails if you go much more than that. Even at 25 seconds, you're getting a little bit, but with my wide angle lens, you don't really notice it unless you get up really, really close.
All I'm going to say is you've got the patience of Job.
Yeah, but the main thing is to make sure that tripod stays absolutely steady for, I've been out there sometimes for 6 hours, and from the first shot to the last shot, the chances of something happening where if the tripod moves even a millimeter, you're kind of screwed. So I've got to be very careful. I've also got to be careful about condensation on the camera. So I keep the camera lens covered when I'm not shooting to make sure it doesn't get any dew on it or whatever. And I've been pretty successful doing that also. So I just
to keep your camera from moving. Then what do? You actually lock it down, tape it down, tie it down?
No, I don't. Now, some people will use like a sandbag to hold it down. I don't do that. I just make sure that the feet of the tripod are really, really solid, either on rock or if it's in ground, I kind of really push it in so that it really can't move. And then I got to make sure if I'm with other people to really make sure that they don't get anywhere close to that, because you're talking about being out there in pure darkness, and for somebody to accidentally trip over your tripod would just ruin your whole night. So I just make sure that I keep people away from it, and I watch myself that I don't accidentally bump into.
I mean, gosh, have you done that? I mean, you must have.
I have never actually done that. I've had a couple of close calls where people were getting kind of close, but I've never had a problem with my tripod moving. And if you notice, or I've noticed that when I line them up, every single pixel in both my before and after shots are absolutely perfect. So that's having a good solid tripod and setting it in place. But some people do use a sandbag, hang down the middle to really hold it down firm. If it's windy, that'll help. But I typically haven't had a problem with wind when I've been shooting.
Good.
Nice. What do you do to pass the time while you're waiting for these shots?
Pardon?
What do you do to pass the time while you're waiting for these shots?
Yeah, when I was up at Mount Shasta, I had about 6 hours from my first to my last shot. So, I mean, I would listen to music, I would read a book, I took a little nap, I had all kinds of stuff. So I just, I try to stay warm. Hopefully I'm close to my vehicle so I can do that. Now at Yosemite, 4 miles from the car, we didn't have much protection. But it was a nice evening, so it wasn't too bad. But I just, you try to keep yourself busy for all that time, just and wait.
Nice. Where's somewhere that you want to travel to maybe do some of these astro photography photos and you haven't been to yet?
Well, my next trip hopefully is going to be to Morocco in Northern Africa. And I'm hoping to, matter of fact, I'm going with a photographer from Toronto. You might know him, Richard Martin, Chris, a very good photographer. I've been with him just on several occasions. And he goes every year to Morocco. And I actually taught him how to do this night photography in Cuba. But that's kind of my next trip. I'd like to go back to Yosemite and get a better shot over Half Dome. But it's going to take more planning and more time to get to the right spot there, which we didn't. We kind of got messed up with the traffic coming out of the valley, and we didn't get there in time. So we didn't get the optimal location. So I'd like to go back and do that. But I've got a couple other places I'd maybe like to go. But I've kind of covered most of the main ones so far that that are at least within a reasonable distance. That are away from the light pollution too.
Yeah.
That'd be the beauty of Cuba. I've been there many times on vacation, never professionally to do anything or even bother taking any pictures. I don't know about you, but when I'm on vacation, the last thing I want to even look at is a camera.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you're in that profession.
But, yeah, I mean, talking about getting away from light pollution, that's the place, yeah.
Yeah.
Keith, have you ever considered maybe doing a 360 shot of the photograph?
I've seen some interesting shots that look like they're 360, and I'm not even sure how they're created because I've got a 24 millimeter lens. It's pretty wide, and I can't even come close to getting the whole Milky Way in one shot. So how these guys are able to do that, unless they're taking several images and stitching them together and then putting them and then kind of shrinking them down and putting them over a landscape that's much narrower.
Keith, I'm kind of familiar with that, looking at doing 360 movie right now. And it's a software program you can actually purchase 4 still cameras that will allow you to do that. And this, in essence, does the stitching for you.
Oh, is that right? Yeah.
Okay. It's the same process, but it's automated through a program.
Okay.
Take an image, stitch them, but you go and you take your images in, you basically go, you move your camera bit, you turn, do as much 360 manually as you can, and the software will fill in the difference.
Yeah. The problem I've had with, and I've done a lot of stitching of images for panoramas, but when you're using a very, very wide angle lens, of course it distorts the image so much when the program tries to match up the pixels, you can't quite figure out what's going on. So sometimes it doesn't work at least in Photoshop, it doesn't work very well.
But you can buy cameras now that are made specifically for that. You
Yeah.
literally push a button and it'll do a 360 for you.
Yeah, yeah. I haven't looked into that, and I really should upgrade my equipment. But
Why not? The Nikon D700 is a good camera.
it is, yeah.
Yeah, I got one myself, so I mean, you know,
Yeah.
That's terrific. Well, Keith, that's all the questions, all the time we have for questions. I'm going to turn it over for you for a last comment or conclusion, and then we're just going to thank everyone. We'll end our program there.
Okay. Once again, thanks for inviting me to present my program. And this is, like I say, just a hobby of mine, and I was fortunate to be able to win the Rotarian Magazine photo contest this year. So I've been able to go around and make this presentation to several Rotary clubs, including my own. So that's kind of fun. So thanks again for having me.
Yeah, and we are very proud that you are a member of our club, because we can keep bragging that you won the photo contest. We have a master photographer. And thank you so much for taking the time to present to us. And thank you everyone for joining us this week. Below this video are going to be links to Keith's website and his photographs, as well as see if we can sneak that link to the Rotarian Magazine article that he has that photograph in. Thank you so much for joining us this week. I'd love to see you next week. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you. Bye-bye.